Welcome from the Manhattan Beach Community Church, an interfaith and interdenominational church at the crossroads of life. We bring you portions of the Sunday morning service from our beautiful sanctuary at 303 South Peck Avenue in the community of Manhattan Beach. We are glad you are joining us for this special service, and we hope it will be a source of inspiration and direction for you in the days ahead. We also invite you to join us in person this coming Sunday morning or any Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. For more information about the church and its wide-ranging programs, please feel free to contact the church office at 310-372-3587. And now, our Sunday morning service.
We come together on this beautiful day here in Manhattan Beach to listen and learn and to pray in God's light, to be with each other, to be inspired, and to remind ourselves that we are the light and that light and the Spirit of God is alive within us and that we must shine that light each and every day of our lives. Let us pray. Dear God, you expect much from us, and we are blessed by all that we have been given. We have a choice in our life. We choose to be aware of who we are and what we want. Our circumstances, our experiences, our history do not limit us. We want happiness in our lives, for our members of our family, for our friends, and for ourselves. And when we are happy, we are successful. Success does not bring happiness, nor does money, nor a new home for very long. But happiness does bring success. When we do what we love, we are successful. Lord, we ask your help in forgiving others by letting go of feelings of resentment and anger toward those who have hurt us. We practice kindness and do good things for others, small things each and every day. We know what we want in our lives and are committed to reaching our goals. We take care of our bodies, we exercise, we meditate and pray, we laugh. We are grateful for all that we have. We express our appreciation for others. Our health, our job, our circumstances in life do not dictate our happiness. We are happy because we are engaged in life and living it to the fullest each and every day. Today, we take a stand for excellence in every area of our lives. We break all agreements with mediocrity. Our true nature is abundance, and we express it fully. Gratefully, we live these words of truth. Please join me in prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
This is the third Sunday in the Lenten season. And in this period of Lent, which leads us up to Palm Sunday, and then to Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and then to Easter, our central focus ought to be that we train the searchlight of our thoughts and our reflections on the teachings and the example of Jesus, who gives us life and a sense of direction as God has laid out a roadmap for each of us. We train the searchlight of our thought upon some of the immortal words of Jesus, which for 2,000 years have helped to sustain the world and to sustain us. They have also at times mystified us and given rise to questions in our life. Today I would like to focus in on one of Jesus' central teachings, which is somewhat of an enigma wrapped in a mystery. Purportedly, these words, uttered by Jesus some 2,000 years ago, came from the top of the cross as he uttered a few last words during the period and the time of his crucifixion on what has become known as Good Friday or God's Friday. There are 7 particular words or phrases that are found in the Gospels that are attributed to him on the cross. And on Good Friday, we plan to revisit those words. But I wanted to take one today and to share it with you in such a way that you might reflect upon it and see where you come out. For it's probably one of the most controversial of all of his teachings, and yet one of the most important, and one that affects us in our day-to-day life in ways that we can never imagine. And it is always with us, for we are required to participate in this particular word. This word comes from the Gospel of Luke. It comes out of oral tradition and then was written down many years later as those that stood underneath the cross listened to Jesus as he spoke a few last words in the agony of the crucifixion. One of these words is the following: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This gives rise to the whole issue of forgiveness in life. And forgiveness is usually coupled with some degree of anger. For in order to forgive, we have to have somebody or something to forgive. And usually we are angry about that somebody or that thing that we must allow ourselves to dismiss in some way so that we can move on. All of us are aware that holding anger within ourselves and never dealing with it, never being able to get beyond us, gives us a sense of living that is not really living, for it becomes an obsession and reoccurs with frequency and can actually stall us in our course of life, leave us stuck in a very bad place. For anger is a very damaging emotion. It is a very damaging feeling. For when you're angry at people, or you're angry at something that has happened, it has a way of contaminating your whole life. And somehow we have to move on. It's interesting. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There's another part of that, of course. Jesus doesn't say it, but we know what it is. Father, forgive them, for they know exactly what they do. That is the corollary, is it not? Not knowing, not being aware of how we have slighted someone, not being aware of how we have harmed or hurt someone, not being aware that our deeds and our words create a lot of trouble. And on the other hand, recognizing when we utter our words and do our deeds that we know exactly what we're doing, and that is harmful to other people. And it makes them sad or angry or upset and so on. We are all aware of that. So you have two different sides to the coin. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is Jesus. And then you add, Father, forgive them, for they know exactly what they're doing. And I don't know if that's Jesus. That may belong to God, that particular sentiment. And God may have to deal with that. Certainly, we have to deal with it because we come in contact with people who are hurtful and harmful and know exactly what they're doing. It's interesting, as Jesus looked down from the cross, he could see a number of different kinds of people. The disciples essentially had headed for the hills by that time, but the women in the entourage that followed Jesus and others were there near the cross waiting for his death. The Roman soldiers were there right next to the cross. In fact, they were gambling for his garments. And then there was the Jewish political and religious hierarchy who were lurking in the background to make sure that Jesus really died. Now, Jesus' words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, apply more to the Romans than they do to the Jews in this instance. For the Romans were somewhat mystified as to why Jesus needed to be put to death and to be crucified. There was no particular reason. Remember, Pontius Pilate was quite mystified by Jesus, found him to be a great enigma, and he couldn't understand why this man needed to be put to death. He was the Roman representative in the occupied Holy Land, and Pontius Pilate saw that he had no army. He was a man of intelligence and solitude. He didn't seem to be inciting any riots. What trouble could this man be to the Roman Empire? It was really the Jews in that moment of time 2,000 years ago that wanted to put Jesus to death. Number one, they did not like his teachings. They were unusual. They were heretical in their minds. They'd never encountered someone who understood peace as Jesus did, or understood love as Jesus did. And forgiveness was probably not in the Jewish political and religious hierarchies' frontal lobes as they thought about the world. They were also worried that if Jesus somehow did gain a popular following in his days in Jerusalem, that there would be trouble, that he could stir up trouble. And any trouble in Jerusalem would be laid at the feet of the Jewish political and religious leaders, and they didn't want any part of that because that would upset the nice arrangements they had made with the Roman Empire to keep themselves in power, to feather their own nests, to make life go on in a nice way for them, if not for the common people who, as usual, were taking it in the neck from both the Romans and the Jewish political and religious hierarchy. So we have this notion of they know not what they do, which Jesus says people do all kinds of things that are harmful in the short run and the long run, and they don't know the harm they're doing. And we can see that in our experience. And then there is that other side where people know exactly what they're doing. Not long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was on a Saturday night, on the public broadcasting station here in Los Angeles, they showed a kind of a gala celebration and fundraiser, which I believe came from Las Vegas. It was in honor of two of Las Vegas's most prominent figures, Siegfried and Roy, who played in Las Vegas for many, many years and were probably the best ticket in town in history. They had done hundreds and thousands of shows over the years and had dealt with crowds of people and their wonderful magic and their wonderful capacity to incorporate into incredible magic scenarios the most beautiful animals of the world, mainly white Siberian tigers. And then on one night, in one moment, for Siegfried and Roy, it all really ended. One of the tigers, who had been a part of their act for somewhere between 6 and 8 years, as I recall, by the name of Manticore, and was a favorite of Roy's, who was the animal trainer. Actually, Siegfried always said he was afraid of the animals, but he'd make them appear and disappear, and many of you saw this wonderful show and the tigers that were at the Mirage on display. But one night something happened after all these years, and Manticore, this huge white Siberian tiger, saw that Roy did something unusual amidst the lights and the music and the sound and all of the special effects, and it disoriented him in some way that he thought he had to probably protect Roy. And doing what tigers do, he picked him up by the neck like he would a cub tiger and carried him off stage. Well, as all of you know, he almost killed him. And if it were not for the usual large staff and medical people that they kept on hand and their ability to extract Roy from the jaws of this tiger, why, he would not be alive today. And he was hurried off to the nearest trauma center. And for all intents and purposes, today he can barely talk and he can barely walk. But the last thing he was heard to say, and the only thing he really said when they were extricating him from the jaws of the tiger and getting him away from the stage and off to a hospital was, "Don't harm the tiger. Don't harm the tiger." You see, that fits the description of Jesus. The tiger did not know what he was doing, really. He was not in Roy's mind or in anyone else's mind trying to harm this great performer that gave such pleasure to so many people for so many years. And Roy understood that, and that was his only concern as he was near death. After years of rehabilitation, they were able to put on a few scenes at this gala and fundraiser for brain injuries, as I recall. But I thought about that statement, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." It is a real category, for that tiger certainly did not know what he was doing to his friend. And much to Roy's credit and Siegfried's credit, there amongst them at this special gala was that tiger, Montecore, right between them. And Roy, as soon as he was able, tried to make peace with a rather large, unpredictable cat. And so there is forgiveness in the world, and we know about it. And Roy does not blame the tiger for what happened to him. And it was just one of those things that can happen in the world. But we are angered often by what people say and what people do. And it is interesting because people say hurtful things and do hurtful things in different forms. And if we're smart, we give them the benefit of the doubt. We cut them some slack. If they continue to do it, it becomes a little more concerning, and we become a little more anxious about their behavior. Most people that lash out at other people really are trying to find somebody to lash out at. And it is other problems, depression, concern, worry, and anxiety that make people disagreeable, and you may be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or you may be the only person available at the time, or the only persons, and people just lash out in their frustration of life. And so it's helpful to cut people slack at times and give people the benefit of the doubt. Try not to take things personally. That's one of the things I learned, and I don't know where I learned it. I know I express it in a rather interesting way in an old Arab proverb, and you've heard me say that. As a minister, you're criticized, and your church is criticized from time to time. And I always remember that old Arab proverb, "The dogs may bark, but the caravan continues on." The dogs may bark, but the caravan continues on. Henry M. Stanley, who traveled through Africa and who probably met a few Arab slave traders in his day, used to reverse that in a way. He used to say, "I never change my course for the barking of dogs." He was a little more harsh. But there are times when it's helpful to see whether your critics are people of substance or they're just a voice crying in the wilderness. And we try not to take their anger personally, and that's a help. And if we are able to do that, that is one of the secrets of life, is not being angry at people no matter what they say, because that is what allows you. The secret of life is to continue to move forward. Whenever your anger makes you go dead in the water, it's got the best of you. and it's not a happy experience. Many of you know that I have spent many summers on Lummi Island in the San Juan Islands up in the state of Washington for many years. And there were two farmers that lived side by side. I knew them from the time I was a small child. And they were typical old country farmers, and they were friends in the early days, and their farms adjoined one another, and they spoke with each other every day. And they each had about 100 acres, and they each had cattle and so forth that would stray from one farm to the other, and they would agreeably deal with all this. And then one of the farmers decided to put up some fencing, or at least repair the fencing, which they didn't worry that much about. And the other farmer accused him of putting the fencing on his property, and that he was taking some of his property. And they got into a terrible argument about this little piece of fence that was probably about as long as one of our pews here. And they didn't literally talk to one another for 25 years. The interesting thing was they had to see each other every day, and their homes were visible to one another. And when they drove out of their farms onto the main road, they had to access the single road that they both traveled on. So they would judiciously wait for one another, whether they were coming in or coming out, and for 25 years ignored each other, and did so until they died. There is a happy ending to the story. Two of their children married each other. Yeah, anger is really not very creative and productive in a personal sense. And yet I suppose everybody here today, if you were all honest, and I will give you the benefit of the doubt, I'll cut you a little slack today, are probably angry over the financial collapse of America in the way that it has crumbled in the last months. For in almost every quarter, it has done families and individuals harm. In almost every realm of life, it has visited upon us some kind of hardship. And deep down inside, we're kind of angry about all of that. For we did not expect to see modern-day robber barons running through our lives, making us miserable. Pure and simple, a whole lot of people fleeced the public at our expense. No ethics, no values, no morals, just good old-fashioned greed. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's not the case. They knew exactly what they were doing. The poster boy for all of this is probably Bernie Madoff, who made off with at least $50 billion, if not more, of people's money. And he had a lot of captains of industry and lieutenants and corporals and so forth that helped him in this enterprise, not only within the small framework of his operation, but all over the country. We find robber barons of a modern stripe lurking in various places, people who were willing to take advantage of everyone else for the sake of their own personal wealth, their own personal pursuits, and their own personal comfort. All of you remember Jesus and the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, you remember. And he was working for the Roman Empire and the Jewish political and religious leadership. And not only was he taking the amount of taxes that Rome needed, he was also probably taking some taxes that the Jews would like thrown into their coffers. And he was keeping some for himself. And he had a meeting with Jesus, as the story goes. And with Mrs. Zacchaeus and all the little Zacchaeuses, he went to their home. And he sat down, and after he was through talking with Zacchaeus, he said, "Salvation has come to this house this day." And Zacchaeus, you remember, went around restoring to everyone in the community, because he probably had no friends left, less friends than an Amway salesman. I got in trouble the last time I used that illustration. But the dogs, never mind. The point was that Zacchaeus went around and restored fourfold to everybody he had cheated what was owed. And Jesus, on that basis, said the man had been saved. Been saved from himself is who he'd been saved from. But the little Zacchaeuses could go to school, and Mrs. Zacchaeus could go shopping, and they had a new lease on life, and they could go forward because they had a community of friends around them. And so there are times to apologize with words and deeds. Now, what do you do about the big-time evildoers in all sectors of life who harm other people? I am a great believer in restraint of evil. And Lord knows all you have to do is pick up the Sunday paper. Try Wednesday, it'll do just fine. And you will see acts of aggression, acts of violence, acts committed by people of all kinds that are absolutely reprehensible. People who need to be restrained in all stratas of life. The poor and the wealthy, the deranged, and so on. I often ponder what heaven will be like. I certainly hope I don't have a billet next to Hitler and Stalin. Well, maybe I won't get to heaven either. But that's all God's place to figure out. But what about all those people that wreak hardship on others and that have made us terribly angry and have changed our plans for the future? And yet, if we wallow in that anger, we will never move on. And that's the secret of life. As the good rabbi would say, who will be here next week, we've got to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And walk is the operative word. Wallow is not an option. We can't just stare and sit and become upset. But all of us have a great struggle with certain personal issues that over time continue to creep into our lives and make us less of what we are and ought to be. For we are angry with people, and it's until we can let that anger go, then we have some freedom to move on. And all of us struggle with that issue, for there are people that frequent our lives over the years that we remember. We may have been able to forgive them, but we don't forget them. I have tried to examine my own life in that regard, and there is only one person that really haunts me and that I have a hard time with over 72 years. Some of you know who were here last Sunday, my daughter was visiting from Australia. Well, actually, she was on her way to Australia. She'll be visiting when she comes back. But she's there to meet with her husband, who is coming from Iraq. He works there as a contractor, and his family home is in Australia. And she and I were spending a pleasant afternoon together, and I went to the mailbox and retrieved the mail. And there in the mail, along with the bills and the other recognizable things, were the selection of what we would call flyers or junk mail, or those wonderful political things you used to send out, Jim. You need to know that this guy next Tuesday at 7 o'clock will have served Manhattan Beach for 8 years very admirably. And so as I'm looking through the mail, I see this very attractive, wasn't that big, it was about this big, I suppose, flyer. And it was for cosmetic surgery. And the doctor that was doing it had placed his name prominently there. And I had seen other flyers and knew of other seminars that he had done on the subject. I took that flyer and I flipped it into my daughter's lap. My daughter looked at that flyer and she said, "You think I need plastic surgery?" And I said, "No, Melissa, look at it more carefully." And then a very kind of, how would you describe it? I suppose an unbelievable look came over her face. And she said, "I know who that is." And we both know who it is. First, this cosmetic surgeon was an eye, ear, and nose and throat specialist. The reason I mixed that up, I call them eye, ear, nose, and wallet men. But this was the fellow who had operated on my wife 17 years ago and did simple sinus surgery. And inadvertently, he had done something terribly wrong. And the short version is my wife lost the best of her life. She lost her profession. And the Calhoun family lost a lovely future. He would not see us after a while. He'd never had a problem like that. He'd never seen pain to that degree. And the people he referred to us were of no help, and my wife was in excruciating pain. My wife had had the surgery. They do hundreds and thousands of them every day in America. I didn't even know she was going to have the surgery, and I didn't even know who was going to do it. She had gotten the recommendation from Palos Verdes through the Chadwick School where she was teaching. She never taught again. He tried to do and say a few reasonable things, but he didn't know what to do. And finally, when we went to see him, and I'd have to take someone with us because she was in such pain, he would be gone on purpose, and his associate would look at her. And I always remember when the associate put the X-ray up into the machine and looked at it because he was not familiar with the case, he said, "I wonder why he did it that way." That was very interesting. And it was only years later that we learned from some very good doctors and specialists what he had really done. He did not want to help us. He did not want another doctor to look at what he had done. And I finally had to threaten him. And I said, "I'm coming over to see you." And he finally talked to me. It was very interesting because when I called him on the phone, I said, "Somebody has to know more than you do about this." My wife was losing her metabolism. She was in constant pain, such as a migraine headache to the 10th power. And this had gone on, and it couldn't go on much longer without some relief. So I said to him, "Somebody, Harold, has to know more than you do about all this." And he knew. He was afraid, of course, of being sued, I suppose. And he finally said, "Dr. Rice at USC," and put down the phone. And fortunately, we had all the documentation which we had needed for disability and so on. And we began the road back to some degree. But she never really has recovered from all that. The point that I make is the man never said he was sorry. I've seen him a couple of times. He holds these seminars. He's upgraded himself to a cosmetic surgeon. He holds these seminars at these large hotels, and I've restrained myself from going over and sitting in the middle of one of these seminars and waiting for the question and answer period, and then standing up and saying, "Ladies, I'd like to tell you how he took good care of my wife." But that would only solve one thing: my sense of humor. And that would just make me more angry and continue my obsession. And yet we have to move on in life. And we have to the best of our ability. But Jesus' famous words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," are very interesting. This doctor knew exactly what he did, but he didn't know how to handle that. Jesus, you know, was very generous. You know the story of the prodigal son, how you forgive the young man who's gone off and made a mess of life. And then he talks about, why are you always trying to deal with the speck in your brother's eye when you've got a log in your own? You can look through the New Testament, and Jesus spends more time on love and forgiveness, which are tied together, than probably any other subject. Well, I guess we have to leave the exactly part. Father, forgive them, for they know exactly what they're doing. The evildoers of life, we need to leave the exactly part to God and move forward the best we can as we continue to ponder the words that Jesus made famous.
We are pleased that you have joined us for the Sunday morning service from the Manhattan Beach Community Church, an interfaith and interdenominational congregation. We hope that the music and the spoken word have lifted your spirits and have offered guidance and a sense of direction for your life. Have a wonderful week.